Welcome to the Solution Seekers podcast, where we uncover the future of bringing people together through the eyes of industry leaders. We love these conversations and hope you will too. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Solution Seekers podcast. I'm your host, Paige Buck. Past guests include Shay Cebulski of Adobe, Sarah Baseso of Informatica, and Pierce Larrick of New Revolution Media. And today I'm delighted to be interviewing Mallory Schlossberg. Mallory is an award-winning creative who fuses her hybrid background of brand, theater, and editorial to drive work that pushes the limits of the expected and puts the attendee at the center of it all. In 2023, she was named one of Chief Marketer Pro and Event Marketer Top Women in Marketing in the Creatives category. She currently brings events and experiences to life for Google Cloud's go-to-market creative services team, and she has previously held roles at Google Fiber, Whole Foods Market, and Hearst Digital Media. In addition to her brand work, she is a theater director, performer, and writer, and the soundtrack to her original musical, Human Resources, is available on Spotify. She is also a musical improv instructor in Austin, Texas, and has taught people all over the globe how to improvise songs thanks to the magic of the internet. Before we get started, today's episode is brought to you by Kennedy Events. Kennedy Events creates stress-free conferences and events, providing expert management and design for all your corporate event needs, from in-person to hybrid and virtual. You can learn more about us at kennedyevents.com. Mallory, hello, hi, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's really weird hearing your own bio read out loud.
Oh my gosh, I didn't, you're like, did I write that? Should I change that?
Yeah.
But your bio is such a joy, and I cannot wait to listen to Human Resources. I'm a music theater nerd, so I just kind of sit in awe of all the different all the different creative outlets you get to play in.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's all my passion, and I think it helps out with doing the kind of work that I do.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, like everything threads into everything else.
Oh, totally. And that's what I tell people when they're like, how did you get into it? And I usually say I fell into it because all of the things that I was doing made sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Tell me more about that. How did it all make sense? And what was
So,
it?
so as you said, all the different things I've done, I have a pretty varied background. I've been doing theater forever. I've worked in creating all kinds of content, storytelling formats, from literally hosting storytelling shows in New York, to touching everything from like videos to signage to journalism to editorial to UX for apps. But like ultimately, my theater work is my most significant influence. You mentioned I'm an improv instructor. I'm a performer and director in Austin. So experiential really is just kind of a home for all those skills I've accumulated. But like, to be clear, I did not go to school for this. I wanted to be on SNL or on Broadway.
Nice. It could still happen.
We'll see. It depends on who's listening.
That's right. This is the moment. It's going to be because they heard you on our podcast.
Yes, I need to be really funny now.
What, how did things progress from theater to working in the corporate experiential side of things?
I mean, I had been working at Google in a separate role, and I was very fortunate that when I was looking for my role at the time, I saw a career coach who actually said to me, why aren't you talking about all the theater stuff you've been doing your whole life? At the time, I was producing virtually Human Resources during the pandemic, which was really an amazing accomplishment for so many people who were involved in it, because we did all these crazy technical things to do a musical live over the internet. And in the beginning of the pandemic, that was unheard of. And I was managing all these different parts, all these technical solutions, all of these things. And a career coach I was working with basically said, why aren't you talking about this when you look for jobs? And I was like, well, I don't think they're going to take me seriously. And the person said, well, I think it might actually help you. And so I talked about it, and I wound up in my current role.
Wow. So it's also pretty recent, it sounds like, that you took experiential fully into your like corporate day job, so to speak.
So since I would say I would took formal events relatively recently, several years ago, but
Mhm.
when I look back on it, I actually have been doing experiential for longer. If you consider theater it, if you consider virtual productions that, if you consider UX that, if you
Sure.
consider all these other things that. So what I like to tell people is, we shouldn't have a narrow mind of what experiential or events are. Because anything can be an experience. Going to the grocery store can be an experience. And if you're thinking about designing that, me thinking about designing sets and thinking about people walking into a theater and people thinking about people scrolling interactive experiences. I've been thinking about these my whole career. So, I mean, if I was giving advice to somebody, I would say you probably already have experiential experience. It's just how are you framing it?
And do you even see it for yourself?
Sorry.
Like, does that person even see for themselves
Yeah,
how
I think a
they're
lot of
doing?
people don't. I think a lot of people don't. I think they're like, "Well, have I done a conference? Did I intern this? Was I a producer? Did I do that?" But I actually think in the more diverse perspectives that people bring in to the industry, the better the work gets. Because then we start breaking formulas, we stop doing the things that everybody expects, we start trying new things, and that's what I am really passionate about. Basically, defying expectations and doing things that are new.
I love that word defying, like that phrase, defying expectations. It's amazing. And when you just said that everyone's doing experiential, if you think about what that includes, and you mentioned the grocery store, I was at experiential marketing summit recently, and a friend in the industry was giving a presentation where she was describing exactly that. She's like, so you came in here and you had thoughts and preconceived notions, and now you're having feelings. Maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's hunger, maybe it's excitement, maybe it's boredom. Like, but you're having feelings. We're evoking something in you. What are they? And then how do we play with that
Yeah,
to center the attendee?
absolutely, absolutely. There's a book by this author, Margaret Carrison. She's absolutely brilliant, and she has a book that recently came out that talks about like narrative placemaking. I don't want to misquote it, but I think that's what
Mm.
it's called. Basically, about how you can create a narrative in literally any single space, and I think that's really essential. The moment you walk in anywhere, the story begins. The story begins actually before when you're thinking about it, exactly of those preconceived notions, etc. And I think that it's that kind of thinking that's really important, and to not just think about it as, oh, the moment that we have the keynote, it begins. That's a fragment of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like, what gets you out of bed in the morning? What excites you in your current role?
What excites me in my current role, there's something obviously really magical about getting to lead an experience from like the first seed of an idea, watch it germinate to full execution. I feel very fortunate. I've been empowered, bring my whole self to work and to try anything, which is really awesome. I mean, I feel like that's any creative's dream. I personally am uninterested in doing what's been done before. So, getting to do something new or a little scary, I think that's what excites me the most, and I've been really lucky that I've gotten to do a lot of that recently.
Can you share some examples of what defying conventions or sorry, I just, as the music theater nerd, and it's far from my
Defying gravity.
I know, I
I
I
knew
almost said
I knew
defying gravity instead of defying conventions.
uh-huh.
And I'm like, Wicked is like way down the list of musicals that I like. So apologies for that.
That's
But
okay.
but yeah, just any like what's a quotidian example of defying a basic convention?
Okay, so obviously I can't go into too much detail, but I will say I
Yes.
worked on an event that historically had traditional breakouts, and I asked that we have none. So we literally broke down walls. Now, that's not the answer for every event, but it answered the challenge, the objective we had. Uh, I think, the important thing is to never get bogged down by, oh, we did it this way and it worked, let's do it again, but to constantly move the needle, reject the lexicon that's been established, and to constantly be curious about new ways of doing things and just rejecting formulas. I feel like as a creative, the job is to problem solve and then to ask questions and then to solve those questions.
This concept of putting the attendee as the protagonist, or like they're the hero of this journey in this day-long conference or this evening product launch or whatever it may be. How does that influence the way you think about the event?
Okay, do you have like 10 years? Because I could talk about this forever.
Sure, I'm here for
Not 10 years. That's a really long time. So it's interesting when I bring up attendee as protagonist, and I talked about this at a webinar for BizBash actually pretty recently. Um, there's a way to misconstrue it. Once I brought it up to someone and they're like, yeah, everyone has main character syndrome these days. And I'm like, no, 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 that's not what it means. What it means is if you look at your experience, your event, your launch, whatever, as a story, every story has a protagonist. It's the person going on the journey, whatever that journey may be, however it may be structured, linear, nonlinear, hero's journey, story spine, etc. They are essential to the progression of the story. And a lot of time, content is designed and the attendee could literally walk out of the room and nothing would change. And what happens when it's the attendee and not the presenter driving something, it makes immersive more effective because stuff's not just happening at you, but with you and alongside you, and it can't happen without you. And so when you do it that way, ultimately it should lead to a behavior change, because if you think about stories, all good protagonists change. So I think if you use that model on like a really intricate level, you could see the results of whatever you're trying to achieve. I typically look at it through 4 principles. I can dive into them if you want, or
Yeah, please. I think
okay.
we'd love to hear it.
So I've talked about these before elsewhere. I like to think about it as action, immersion, humanity, and autonomy. All like neuroscience, research-backed principles on how human beings process information and engage with content. So think about action. It's active learning, not passive. Is it a lab versus a session where you're talked out? Immersion, about creating like an embodied experience where attendees are like leveraging and encompassing an environment. Humanity is about designing for everyone and zeroing in on truth. And then autonomy is about giving people that like autonomy within parameters, if that makes sense.
Yes. And so in autonomy, something that I'm hearing quite a lot of in the industry is around choice and giving attendees just lots of different ways to have an experience with you. Does that
Yes,
resonate for you?
absolutely. And I think that's also a way of being critically like, it's critical because it means you're inclusive, because everybody processes stuff differently. So some people want to sit and observe something. Some people want to touch something and they're tactile learners. Other people want to go into a small pod and talk to people. Other people thrive in environments with big projections and lights, and other people that's really too stimulating for them. And
Yes.
so it's not just about giving people choice, it's about understanding that there is no one way that people experience things.
If you're eliminating breakouts and you have and you are also creating a shared experience, how might you play with choice within like, one space?
So it's a lot of it comes down to spatial design. So you still may have, your stages or your areas to congregate and what's not, but you're basically trying to create a space. Think of it as more of an open world format. If you were playing an open world video game, or if you were going to a theme park or something like that, and you are exploring and doing what you feel is interesting at the moment. This thing appeals to me. This thing appeals to me. And it also gives space for the breaks that you might want to take. It also should be designed so that you might naturally have a collision with somebody else and have a really beautiful, spontaneous, organic moment. So, in this regard, you are letting people do what interests them and also what their body feels they need in that moment. They might not want to sit that long. They might want to stand. They might want to walk through an auditory only hall or something like that. Now, like obviously there are sometimes instances where you need your tracks, but I do think that the more we acknowledge that people learn and interact with things differently, the more effective our experiences will be.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's really, I think it just opens up so many possibilities too.
Mhm.
How do you balance all of this innovation against constraints, like real world constraints? There's only so much money. There's only so much time.
Uh, hold on one second. Okay, so I talked to you about the why behind the wow. So I think innovation doesn't mean all the cool bells and whistles and latest technology. And I think it usually gets misrepresented as such.
Mhm.
I think innovation can be as simple as let's rearrange our furniture in a way that gets people talking in a different way. It can actually mean taking things away. What if you had an event that historically was really grandiose? And well, that doesn't resonate with the audience anymore because of the economic climate. Well, then what do you do? How do you pull people in without all the lavish excess? That's innovation. And I think it's important, what are you prioritizing? What are you investing in when it comes to production, creative, et cetera? What's going to have the biggest impact, not just what's cool? And that to me is like what the why behind the wow is ultimately about. You can't do it all. And if you are doing it all, then you're not editing and you don't have a story, you don't have a thesis, you don't have an objective. So having that North Star, that brief, that's always really important.
Approaching narrative and strategy, are you typically able to do that from scratch for each event that you're working?
I love getting to do that, starting with understanding what we're trying to achieve and what that story is, and then creating a narrative around that. And I love narrative. And I don't necessarily mean like hero's journey or anything. I think it just means like a story where something changes. I think what I love the most about this is I feel like often you're doing an event and people are like, well, what's the theme that we're doing? And I would like to banish the word theme from people's vocabulary because a theme is not active. A theme is like outer space. A narrative is mission to Jupiter. I've given that example before, but I think if we think about narrative, even if it's a non-linear narrative, we're thinking about change. And yes, I usually start with like a discovery call to understand the objective, what we're trying to achieve, what does success look like, the why. I
Yes.
jam with fellow creatives, like what's the broad narrative? And once we have that, then everything ladders up to that. Everything should go through that litmus test.
I love that base level example that you just gave of what a theme versus a narrative, because I have been plagued my entire career by what's the theme going to be for this gala? And I'm like, I'm bad at this exercise, guys. It feels so, and realize that it's not just like a lack of ability to like brainstorm and think creatively so much as that it has no meaning in a theme. It is,
Exactly.
it's like you could pick anything. Are you talking about what you want, like coming up with fun decor? Like why? For why?
Exactly. And I think, your theme's like the 60s, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But I think if, we are spending the entire event honoring people of the past that worked at X company and we're going back in time and doing these greatest moments, that's more of a story. And I'm just spitballing
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And I think people get scared of the word narrative because they're like, oh no, is this event now going to become like immersive theater? And I love immersive theater, not everybody does. But what it really just means is that we're like thinking about why we're doing something, and we're thinking about how is somebody going to change by the moment they walk out. How will they be moved? How are we trying to move somebody, and not just like what color should the napkins be,
Yes,
which
or
matters,
I
I mean,
don't
like
know, it has to be fun. So, we have to think about it like it's a prom instead of coming back to like what experience do we want people to have and why? And what
yeah, why are we doing this? What is the stakeholders objective? What does success look like? Does success look like, let's say we're doing like a nonprofit gala, what is it? Donations? Well, how are we going to move people to care about that? It's so I think there's a lot of those kind of questions to ask. And I think constantly being curious helps with that too, and asking why, what if, all of that.
you were mentioning a really fantastic book, and I'm curious, you were saying how everything, all of your different creative outlets thread together to make like who you are and how your brain works and what you bring to the table. What are you reading? I'll also, because this is a non-visual narrative medium, at least today, you have the most beautiful piece of art behind you that I envy, with a woman or girl reading on the floor in front of shelves of books. And
Okay, so I'm going to tell you
so
something,
pretty. Yeah.
about this. The End of Storytelling by Stephanie Riggs is about narrative, and it's the Storyplex, and it's about just emerging mediums of stories.
Mm.
But this is my bookshelf, but that's the one that's right there right now. I'm also reading like a textbook about architecture, which is pretty nerdy, but that.
That's fantastic. Now, wait, is this like home architecture, urban design? Like what?
Interior design, architecture, just, wanting to know more about ins and outs and things like that. I come from a story and production background and stuff. And so the more I know and the more I learn about everything that's involved in an experience, the better. So I read architecture textbooks.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I kind of really want to go back to something that you said at the very beginning about producing the musical Human Resources, because I was thinking about the early days of COVID and how we all suddenly had this shared realization that you can't say, all sing happy birthday to somebody on Zoom, or it's a hot mess. And that latency problem that you must have had to overcome, I'm in awe.
So there are these technologies. There's this thing called audio movers that really aids in it. And we did figure out ultimately that we had to pre-record the music and we had people live lip sync to it because we had such a robust band for some of the songs and we had such intense choral music. But we were very adamant about not having it be fully edited because you lose the magic of live theater. And I remember we had some issues where we had technical difficulties and we had a thing flash across the screen. And I remember people texting me and saying, I think that was my favorite part because it reminded me that it was live. And
It's
but
real, stuff happens.
yes, but I did teach musical improv virtually during the pandemic, and I worked with a really brilliant pianist, musical director, and there are different technologies out there to help do audio virtually, which is awesome because that means people can do voice lessons, learn music virtually, and it just kind of opens people up to different things.
Yes, I know it was a beautiful achievement when I saw, I think that an Oakland, California-based symphony figure out how to do small trios and quartets over COVID,
Yeah, it,
record together and share together from in people's backyards and homes.
it takes a lot of patience, but I feel like there was so much resiliency in art and creation during those times that I think people had the patience and resilience to figure a lot of that out.
It's also amazing that like the that it feels like the arts community is where the patience and resilience came from. Seeing it was really inspiring, and it felt like perhaps, I mean, using resilience in a different way of like that people who engaged in that sort of creative problem solving were better off mentally, emotionally for the effort.
I think so. I had a lot of friends doing various projects, doing various readings, doing other various shows and things like that virtually, and finding ways to oh my God, I can't believe it's 4 years ago now that I'm thinking about it.
Right. I know. I
Ugh.
know. How do you, speaking broadly, how do you communicate with and move people who don't have your background and the curiosity and the yes and of improv into like a shared understanding of the opportunities that all the experiential can achieve?
So hopefully if I'm doing my job well enough and I'm telling the story about what we're going to achieve, and I walk them through the whole thing from the beginning and what the end could be, and I do a decent job of that, hopefully that works, right? Because my job, I should be able to communicate to anybody. I really shouldn't just be talking in my nerdy internal inside baseball jargon stuff. I can do that all day long with people who do what I do, but it's really important that I bring people along on the journey and also invite people in, and I don't keep people at arm's distance. And you know, with the yes and of it all, letting anybody in and like saying yes, let's go with that. I think that really helps. And again, just telling the story of what we could achieve, I think can really help.
Are there any personal passions or interests that you bring to your professional work that you haven't gotten a chance to touch on yet? Seems like there's so many.
Um, well, we mentioned I do theater, improv, storytelling, write music.
Read architecture books.
I obviously, I mean, I'm a writer, which because I've done in my professional career. And when I'm not doing that, I'm a mom. So,
Oh, and you're a mom too. Oh my
yeah,
goodness. How old is your child or children?
he is 3 years old.
3 years old. Well, that also requires a lot of creative engagement.
Does it's nonstop improv.
Nonstop improv. Nice. Does he inspire some of your storytelling and way you think about experiential?
Actually, yeah, because I think that the lack of judgment and the sense of wonder and curiosity that a child has is something we can all benefit from. If we approach everything from a place of curiosity and wonder and newness and awe, it makes you look at things differently. We come from a place of preconceived notions of judgments because we have however many years of experience. But when you take a step back and think about somebody processing something for the first time and only having questions that are sincere and genuine and devoid of judgment, it completely changes the way you think about things. So I mean, I think my child has made me more creative and better at the things that I do because I'm learning about these things that I've blocked. We all block those things. It's how we put on our social masks, all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to me. I mean, it makes 100% sense to me, and I see like how my nephews fuel or exhaust, my my creative muscles, and what that in turn fuels in my business life. But it's uh maybe you just gave me a little bit of permission. If even you notice the places where that's turned off, that he can like turn it back on, or light it up in you.
Yeah, and I think that's why I tell everyone, take a level 1 improv class because so much of that is turning on the part of your brain that you've been conditioned to turn off. And once you learn how to kind of turn that back on, it's like you're accessing a whole other part of your brain that lights up, that listens to things, that hears things you haven't heard before, that observes things and in turn gives you new ideas, all of that. So
Yeah.
even if you're going to be a performer, I think everyone should take an improv class.
Oh, you're absolutely inspiring me, because it's been 15 years since I took improv, and my husband, it's not his worldview at all, did it to really step outside himself and got a ton out of it. I'm like, I need to go do that again. Just recently, we had a team retreat where my team here at Kennedy Events, and our facilitator had us start with an exercise where we all went off into a different corner with like cheap and cheerful little watercolor boxes and some water and paper, and had to just paint something, anything, in a very limited period of time. And then we let them dry, and then we tore them up into pieces and put them into a bigger piece together. And in some ways, it's a very everyday little team building activity. But the takeaway for everybody was, oh my God, we need to do more art. Like, can we just do art in team calls together? Can we just do fun, creative? I need it in my life. This did something for me.
Yeah, I mean, art is very good for the brain.
It's very good for the brain, and
Absolutely.
nobody and people appreciate it once they're in it, but you can put a lot of people in a corporate environment into an experience and watch them feel very uncomfortable with it. Or they can stand and they can still come away feeling like that sparked something in them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, so I'm curious, you said you recently gave a webinar at Biz Bash. You sound like you're both um, very free to be in your own space, but you're dialed into our industry. And what trends do you see? And do you have peers that you connect with who get to do the same thing you do, that
So
you
I have a couple things here.
Yeah, tell me.
Sorry, I have something I want to just
Absolutely.
1 second.
Mhm.
Sorry. Okay, wait. Sorry. Okay.
You're fine.
Sorry, you can cut this. I just wanted to get a couple notes. Okay, so trends. So I am not a fan of the word trends because
Uh-huh.
I feel like when you identify a trend, everyone jumps on it and it becomes watered down. I get asked a lot, like, what's your favorite new tech? And there's stuff I think is really cool, but I don't think it matters if it's cool or not. Like, does it augment your objective? Does it help you reach your audience? Is it custom to your audience and the needs of the program? And does it tell your story? And I realize that's kind of a non-answer, but I think like the biggest shifts that we're seeing is, whatever was done before is not happening again. People are breaking out of formulas. We had COVID and then people did virtual events and then like coming back to experiences. Like you can't just do whatever it was before. You have to meet people where they are now in this moment. If you're bringing people to a space, why do they have to be there right now in this moment? in regards to connecting to peers, I'm really excited because I recently joined the World Experience Organization. And next week, I'm traveling to New York to go to the World Experience Summit, where I will be around a bunch of brilliant minds in the experiential industry to talk about, the experience economy, the latest and greatest in creative and all of that. So I'm very excited to just be a sponge and absorb all of the information.
Oh my gosh. And they must have such a big job on their hands, how they make an impact and create an environment for people whose jobs that is. Like, they must just be under a microscope. Because I recently attended a conference for event creatives and looked around and thought they could really use a planner. Like, I was like, and there's some people in the room who could have helped make this a little better. That's got to be hard. That's got to be really hard. But that sounds so exciting. I honestly could not have told you there was a World Experience Association or Summit. And so that sounds like such an exciting opportunity.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm kind of counting down the days for it. I think it's going to be a really exciting, illuminating, transformative couple of days.
Yeah. And I mean, I know you are a lifetime New Yorker at heart, even if you're transplanted right now. Is it fun for you? How often do you get back?
Um, every now and then, and I was there recently. I have family there, so it's always nice to get to go because I have family and friends there. So
Yeah. Yeah. So here's another opportunity. I always piggyback getting to seeing family on the East Coast with, like, I've got a conference, I've got a thing, I've got a
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
yeah,
That's nice too. I hope it's not too hot when you're there. This can be.
it'll be better than Austin, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. I just think of, yeah, I don't know, sweaty and sticky in Midtown. It's like a bad memory.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm also really curious about um what like you said about, like, taking things apart and not having to think that everything has to be high budget, high production. Some of the most innovative things I've seen have been in blank spaces with folding tables and chairs, because it's about that engagement and the way people are, where you meet attendees where they are and what they're learning uh styles are, or their experience, the way they like to experience things. What do you think are some of the, if it's not, you've got to have that LED wall and you've got to have that amazing tech experience, what do you think some of the core elements are that really do make something immersive?
um, Narrative. And I think the most important thing to me really is that immersive is a buzzword, I think. And again, like you said, like a lot of people think it means a large wall of projections, but I think what truly makes something immersive is that you, the attendee, are inside a journey. It's happening all around you, with you, because of you, not at you, and you are essential to it. Yes, your environment could just be a blank space, but there has to be an environment that's purposeful. Every touch point, everything you interact with has to ladder up to your story. And again, that could just be as simple as certain QR codes or copy on the wall, but environment does storytelling. And again, like, you're inside the story, not watching it. Like, it can't happen without you. Like, if you could walk out and it could be different, I think that's really critical. Speaking of New York, I recently went to New York and I got to see a cabaret at the Kit Kat Club. And I had actually seen the same production in London. And the whole thing with it is, oh, it's immersive, it's immersive, it's immersive. You walk in, you're in the club, you go down this like grungy hall, they give you a shot, and you're in the club. And what's really interesting is in New York, it was a little different. It was still amazing. The design work was a massive feat. It was unbelievable. The performances were great. It felt less immersive because they had these performers kind of behind curtains and closed off areas, instead of like performing on bars and like interacting and going by you and whatnot. And it made a difference, having seen it in London, where it was they weren't really closed off, and you were like there with them, as opposed to they're there and we're like on the outside, the periphery of it. Again, like, still amazing, but that sort of made me think, thinking about what I do, about like, you can't just, when it's immersive, it's always about considering the audience, and always about doing a million different attendee journey walkthroughs and whatnot. I
Mm.
also think having a sense of discovery and agency is pretty important to it. And again, going back to that narrative and a sense of change and narrative. So, yeah.
How would you, what advice would you have for somebody who's never had any experience of To somebody who's completely new to this space, what would you invite them to read, try, play with, to get a taste of it and then to get started? Improv 101.
Improv 101. There's another really wonderful book by Margaret Carrison about narrative. I need to look up the title. I love it. I feel bad that I'm not.
That you don't just know it right off
Immersive
the
Storytelling for Real and Imagined Worlds, a writer's guide. If you're
Mm.
interested in like narrative, that's a really wonderful book. And I think what I would also tell them to do is to look around. Go, if you're at a theme park, let's say, right? Think about everything you're interacting with. When you are in nature, think about everything you're interacting with. Um, like I said, everything effectively is an experience. And if you start thinking about everything that way, you will find that you have opinions, you have your own best practices, you have all of that. Ultimately, like, experience is about empathy.
Mm.
It's about like being able to step into someone's shoes and imagine what their journey might be and how they might be changed or moved. Again, like I've talked to people who say I have no experience in experiential, but they're UX designers, they're user experience designers. If like that's experience, if you start thinking about every single interaction, like I mentioned, the grocery store, I feel like you discover you have so much to bring to the table. And I really, really, really believe that what makes work richer is people coming together with different backgrounds and not having the same history. I would tell someone, lead with what you bring to the table and show how that's relevant. I think that it's people are very caught up in everybody having the same traditional pathway, but I think when you do that, you just end up with the same stuff. Um, let's all be changed. Like I love being changed and learning from other people. I think the other thing I would say is to not be scared of bad ideas. Like there's
Mm.
no bad ideas. And I mean, I guess that comes with the privilege of being around people that are supportive and there's that psychological safety and all of that. But I've definitely had ideas that sounded bad on paper and some that could not be executed, but others could. So it's that. I think a lot of it is just being open to what's around you and to your own experiences that you've had.
Yeah. Oh, that openness is really inspiring. And it reminds me too of like if you ever took a photography class at any point in your life, you were sent out into the world with your camera and just told to reframe your, no pun intended, reframe your thinking. Like, what do you see? What's interesting? So much more out there in the world or in your home is interesting through this lens. What would you like to capture?
Exactly. And just going back to like the grocery store thing I said, I was in New York recently and I took my kid to Stu Leonard's. I don't know if you're familiar with
Oh
it, but
my God. Well, the Stu Leonard's in Norwalk, Connecticut. It's
Norwalk,
a
yeah.
quarter mile from my
And
mother's house. Yes.
and it's really funny because you're like, oh, the experience of that versus the experience of going to a Whole Foods or a Stop and Shop or HEB if you're in Texas. It
Hmm.
Every single thing you do is an experience, like the touching the buttons and making the cow moo, like made my kid really happy. And that's important to consider. And I'm sure somebody thought about that design and how the flow of it is like the single aisle and things like that. And I really think that if you start looking at every single thing you walk through, every single thing you do every day as experience, like I think we all are experience designers. You've been to a store and had a hard time finding the bathroom. That's not good experience design. So it's everything is that. And I think it's really just about looking at the world that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. You did some prep for this because we gave you a bunch of questions to make sure, this would fit your constraints. And I'm curious if there's something we asked you to prep for that you haven't had a chance to share yet. Anything else you'd really like to share with our listeners?
um Not no, I mean, it's just great to be here. I really do feel like we're in an exciting time and we're at a point in our collective history where being together in person and feeling a shared purpose is really valuable and it can't be replicated in other ways. And we have a lot of really cool technologies at our disposal. And I think we'll continue to see a lot of it where it's like just used for the sake of using it. But I think we're hitting a point where it goes beyond that. Um, my hope is the industry continues to surprise us. And, I'm sharing my perspective and what I believe, but I'm always willing to be challenged, learn new things. Whenever I teach improv, I tell my students, like, hey, this is what I'm teaching you, but realize that this is all made up and I'm just making it up. I mean, there's a curriculum and there's best practices and whatever, but well, with logistics and all of that, yes, of course there are like good and bad, but I feel like with creative, what is right or what is wrong? I mean, to me, if the question is, are we meeting the need of what we're trying to achieve? Are we meeting the need of the audience? Are we meeting the brief?
Yeah. Yeah. Always bringing it back to how you put it, the why behind the wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think being willing to ask, what if I try this? And to also surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, I think is really important too. It's the best advice I ever got, actually. So, because then you're challenged, and like, if you're not challenged and changed, how can you make work that is um, changing people?
Changing people and challenging their thinking too.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Wow. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mallory. I hope you're good with us sharing some of the books that you shared. Yeah, some of the
Yeah.
real highlights for where you go to learn and think. You're really inspiring, and I think folks will get a lot out of this.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. It was really a pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure talking to you as well.
All right.